The old house creaked and groaned like a tired old man, its bones settling after a long day. It was a symphony of familiar sounds, a lullaby that lulled me to sleep each night. But on this particular night, when I was 12, a new sound pierced the familiar melody, a baby's giggle. It was fleeting, barely a second, but clear as day. A tiny, tinkling laugh that reverberated through the stillness of the night. I lay there, heart pounding, eyes wide open in the darkness. My breath caught in my throat. Had I imagined it? It was just your imagination, I told myself, pushing the thought aside and curling deeper into my covers. But the laughter lingered, a faint echo in my mind. I drifted off to sleep, the image of a smiling baby face imprinted on my eyelids. The next morning, my older sister, Sarah, sat at the breakfast table, a frown creasing her forehead. "Did you hear that last night?" she asked, her voice strained. "Hear what?" I asked, confused. "That baby crying, in the middle of the night," she said, her eyes wide. "It woke me up. I thought you were having a nightmare." My stomach lurched. My mind raced back to the night before. I'd heard laughter, not crying. "No, I didn't hear anything," I said, though the words tasted like a lie on my tongue. The incident haunted me. I couldn't explain it. I didn't believe in ghosts, but the sound I'd heard was so real, so undeniable. I tried to brush it off as a trick of my imagination, a sleep-deprived hallucination, but it continued to gnaw at me. The old house, with its shadowed corners and creaking floorboards, seemed to hold secrets. The laughter, the crying, were just the first whispers of a story I was only beginning to understand. As weeks went by, the events started to repeat themselves. I'd hear the laughter, sometimes in the living room, sometimes in the hallway, always brief, always unsettling. And Sarah would always wake up, complaining about a baby crying. The house became a living puzzle, a place where the mundane and the unexplainable intertwined. I started to feel a presence, a subtle hum in the air, a feeling of being watched. It felt like there was something else in the house with us, something that didn't belong. One night, I was reading in my room when I heard a distinct scratching sound on the wall outside my door. My heart hammered in my chest as I slowly approached the door. The scratching continued, rhythmic and insistent. I took a deep breath and twisted the doorknob. The door creaked open, revealing an empty hallway. The wall was pristine, no mark of the scratching sound. Fear tightened its grip on me. I was starting to lose my grip on reality. Was I going mad? The next morning, I confided in my mother. I told her about the laughter, the crying, the scratching on the wall. She listened patiently, her face etched with concern. "I don't know what to tell you, honey," she said, her voice soft. "This house has been in our family for generations. It's seen its share of joy and sorrow. Maybe there are things we don't understand." She suggested we talk to someone, maybe a priest or a spiritual advisor. I was hesitant, but the thought of sharing the burden with someone, even if they couldn't explain it, was comforting. The priest, Father Michael, listened with a patient ear. He spoke of unseen forces, of the world beyond our senses, of things that existed in the realm of the unknown. He offered a prayer for peace and understanding, and blessed the house, sprinkling holy water in every corner. His words didn't dispel the fear, but they gave me a sense of solace. It was like knowing I wasn't alone, that there were forces at work that were beyond my comprehension. The events continued, but they became less frequent, less intense. The laughter, the crying, the scratching, all faded into a background hum, a faint echo of the mysterious presence. One day, while rummaging through the attic, I stumbled upon an old, leather-bound journal. It belonged to my great-grandmother, the first woman to live in the house. The journal was filled with her handwritten entries, detailing her life, her hopes, her fears. As I read through the entries, I came across a passage that sent chills down my spine. "The baby cries at night," my great-grandmother had written. A tiny, mournful cry that echoes through the empty rooms. It breaks my heart. I yearn to hold him, to comfort him, but he is just a whisper in the darkness, a phantom child. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The laughter, the crying, the scratching, it wasn't just a haunting, it was a legacy, a story passed down through generations. The presence I felt wasn't malevolent, it was a lost soul, a child seeking comfort, trapped in the house for all eternity. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't bring a child back from the dead, but I could offer him peace. I started leaving toys in the rooms where I heard the laughter, whispering goodnight to the empty air. I left a small, beaded necklace by the wall where the scratching had occurred, a symbol of hope and comfort. Slowly, the events started to disappear. The laughter faded, the crying became a faint whisper, the scratching ceased altogether. The presence I felt around the house became lighter, more gentle. It felt like the child was finding peace, a sense of belonging in the house that had been his home in life. I never saw him, but I knew he was there. I felt his presence, a tiny hand reaching out from the darkness, a whisper of a smile in the quiet corners of the house. He was no longer a ghost, but a part of the house, a reminder of the unseen world that existed beyond our understanding. I still don't believe in ghosts, but I've learned to accept the mysteries of the world, the things that defy explanation. The old house, with its creaking floorboards and shadowed corners, remains a place of both comfort and unease. It's a place where the past and the present collide, where the living and the dead share a common ground. And the laughter, though faint, is still there, a reminder of the child who lives on in the whispers of the wind. The air in the room was thick and heavy, a stifling blanket pressing down on me. It wasn't the usual pre-dawn gloom, the kind that clung to the edges of my dreams and chased the remnants of sleep away. This was different. This was suffocating, a silent, unseen presence that held me captive in its invisible grip. I opened my eyes, the blurry world slowly coming into focus. The room was bathed in a faint, silvery light spilling in through the gap between the curtains. It was always a bit unsettling, that sliver of morning sun, the way it danced and flickered across the old, dust-covered furniture, casting long, grotesque shadows on the walls. But tonight the shadows felt different, more intentional. My heart hammered in my chest, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt constricted, as if a hand was squeezing it. I focused on the rhythmic rise and fall of my chest, the shallow breaths I was taking, trying to regain control of my body, to calm the erratic storm raging inside me. Then I saw it. A dark, looming shape, a silhouette so stark it felt like a physical entity, stood at the foot of my bed. It was colossal, stretching up towards the ceiling, its edges hazy and undefined, like a smudge against the pale canvas of the room. It was a shadow, but not like the shadows I knew, the ones cast by the furniture, the ones dancing on the walls. This was different, this was alive. The shadow stood motionless, its silhouette unwavering. I watched, paralyzed with fear, my breath catching in my throat. It seemed to be observing me, taking me in, its gaze piercing through the thin veil of sleep that still clung to me. My eyes darted around the room, searching for an explanation, for a logical reason for this terrifying apparition. The windows were closed, the curtains pulled, the air thick and still. No breeze, no movement, yet the shadow remained, its presence as real and tangible as the rough, worn texture of the bedspread beneath my hand. Then it moved. The shadow stretched, its amorphous form shifting, rippling like water. It seemed to lean forward, its edges blurring further, as if it were about to step into the room, to engulf me in its darkness. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that echoed in my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut, burying my face in the pillow, wanting to disappear, to be swallowed by the mattress, to become one with the darkness. A chill shot through me. It was cold, piercing cold, the kind that invaded your bones and seeped into your very soul. The shadow was closing in, its presence growing stronger, its warmth seeping into the room, filling it with an unsettling energy. It was close, so close I could feel its breath brushing against my cheek. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw back the covers and scrambled out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor. I stumbled towards the door, my gaze fixed on the handle, my fingers fumbling with the lock. The shadow remained at the foot of the bed, watching me. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel its presence, a cold, heavy weight pressing down on me. I could sense its eyes piercing my back, following my every move, as if it were waiting for its moment for me to let my guard down. The lock clicked open. I burst out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I didn't dare look back, didn't dare let myself be consumed by the darkness that seemed to be seeping out from beneath the door, trying to reclaim me. I ran, my bare feet slapping against the wooden floorboards, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I ran until I reached my father's room, the light filtering through the crack under the door offering a sliver of hope in the darkness that had enveloped me. I burst into the room, gasping for breath, my body trembling. My father, still asleep, stirred, his face creased in confusion. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. I couldn't speak, my voice choked by the terror that still gripped me. I just pointed towards my room, my fingers shaking uncontrollably. He sat up, his eyes widening with concern. He followed my gaze, then looked at me, his face etched with worry. "Did you have a bad dream?" he asked, his voice softer now, laced with concern. I nodded, unable to speak, the fear still clinging to me like a shroud. He reached out, his hand gently resting on my shoulder, his touch grounding me, offering a sense of safety in the midst of my terror. "It's okay, sweetheart," he murmured. "It was just a bad dream. You're safe now." I clung to him, the warmth of his presence a shield against the cold, unseen fear that still haunted me. He led me back to bed, tucking me in, his hand stroking my hair, calming the storm that raged inside me. "You're safe here," he whispered. "I'm here with you." But even with his reassuring words and the warmth of his presence, the fear lingered, a shadow clinging to the edges of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the unseen presence was still there, watching me, waiting. The house, a labyrinth of creaking floorboards and dusty rooms, filled with the whispers of the past, was never quite the same after that night. The shadows seemed to dance differently, the creaks of the old house felt more menacing, the silence more profound. The footsteps still echoed through the empty rooms, the voices still whispered in the silence, but now they were accompanied by the chilling knowledge of the unseen, the feeling of being watched, of being followed by something unseen, something that lurked in the shadows, waiting. Years passed, but the memory of that night, of the shadow at the foot of my bed, remained. It was a constant reminder of the unseen, the unexplained, the things that lurked in the darkness, waiting to be revealed. It was a memory that shaped me, that made me see the world differently, that taught me to be wary of the shadows, to be aware of the unseen forces that could lurk in the most ordinary of places. And though I could never fully understand the nature of the shadow, the terror it conjured, it remained a part of me, a piece of my past that I couldn't escape, a constant reminder of the mysteries that lay hidden in the darkness, waiting to be discovered. The years have gone by, and I'm no longer that scared little girl. I've learned to live with the uncertainty, to accept that not everything can be explained, that sometimes the shadows cast by our fears are more real than the world we see. But even now, as I walk through the world, I can't help but glance at the shadows, searching for a flicker of movement, a hint of something unseen, a reminder of the night when the darkness became more than just darkness, when it became a presence, a being, a shadow that haunted my dreams and my waking hours. I know it's irrational, this fear, this constant vigilance. But the shadows, they still hold the power over me, a reminder that the darkness is always there, waiting, watching. And even though I've learned to live with it, to accept it, to even find a strange comfort in its presence, a part of me will always be that scared little girl, huddled under the covers, hoping the shadow won't reach her, hoping the darkness won't swallow her whole. Last summer, our 3-flat building felt like a sauna, and we had no air conditioning. The only relief came from the breeze that occasionally snaked its way through the ancient, narrow windows. My housemate, Laura, was a whirlwind in the kitchen, a symphony of clattering pots and sizzling pans. The aroma of her homemade chili filled the apartment, a savory counterpoint to the oppressive heat. She'd left the back door open, a small metal door that led to a creaky staircase, the only way down to the basement and the other apartments, and ultimately to the back alley. It was our makeshift ventilation system. "Hey, Laura," I called from the living room, where I was trying to find some reprieve from the heat in front of the fan. "Don't forget to close the back door when you're done, it's like an oven out there." "Got it, dude," she yelled back, her voice muffled by the clatter of utensils. I was engrossed in a book, the paper rustling between my fingers, when I heard a sudden clatter from the kitchen. I looked up to see Laura sprinting toward the back door, her face a mask of pale terror. She slammed the door shut with a force that rattled the old hinges. "What the hell?" I asked, my voice rising in alarm. "Someone was outside," Laura gasped, her voice barely audible. "They were calling my name. Hello, hello." It was a woman's voice, and it sounded so close. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice a nervous stammer. "Did you see anyone?" Laura was still shaking, her hands trembling as she pointed towards the back door. "No," she whispered, but I heard her. She was right there. The air in the apartment felt thick, the silence heavy with a palpable sense of unease. I could feel a chill creep down my spine. I glanced at the back door, its old, rusty lock a grim testament to the building's age. "Did you check if anyone was outside?" I asked, my voice strained. I couldn't," Laura stammered. "It was like something was stopping me." We stood there for a moment, frozen in a silent tableau of fear. The sound of our own ragged breaths filled the silence. Then, a creaking sound echoed from the staircase. It was a slow, deliberate creak, like someone was slowly climbing the stairs, each step a groan of protest from the old wood. The sound stopped. We held our breath, our hearts hammering in our chests. Then, another sound. A soft scraping, like someone was pulling themselves up on the railing. We could hear the sound of their breathing, shallow and uneven, as they approached the top of the stairs. Then silence. We could hear nothing but the soft hum of the old fan in the corner of the room. They turned around," Laura whispered, her voice barely a whisper. The steps were creaking as they went back down. The atmosphere in the apartment was thick with tension, a palpable fear that pressed down on us like a leaden weight. We stood there, paralyzed by a mixture of terror and morbid curiosity. We couldn't ignore the strange sounds, the unsettling sense of an unseen presence. After a few minutes, the silence grew unbearable. We needed to know what had happened, needed to understand what was going on. "We need to check it out," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "We can't just sit here." "But what if it's not safe?" Laura argued, her eyes wide with fear. "It's more dangerous to stay here, not knowing," I countered, my voice hardening with a newfound resolve. "We need to see who or what is down there." We gathered ourselves and made our way to the back door, our steps hesitant and unsure. I grabbed a heavy metal saucepan from the kitchen counter, its weight a comforting reassurance in my trembling hands. Laura, armed with a hefty wooden spoon, followed close behind. We took a deep breath, exchanged a nervous glance, and cautiously opened the door. The air was thick and heavy, the smell of damp concrete and mildew permeating the narrow staircase. We descended slowly, each step a creaking protest from the ancient wood. The air felt thick and oppressive, the darkness heavy with unseen shadows. We called out, our voices shaky and uncertain. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing through the darkness. "Is anyone there?" There was no answer, only the soft, unsettling silence of the old building. We continued down the stairs, the dim light from our apartment casting long, eerie shadows on the damp concrete walls. The basement was a labyrinth of narrow, cobweb-covered hallways. We walked cautiously, our weapons held tight, our senses on high alert. We searched every corner, every room, every dusty closet, our voices echoing through the emptiness. "Hello?" We called out again, our voices a nervous refrain in the oppressive silence. "Is anyone there?" There was no answer. The basement was empty. We returned to our apartment, shaken but relieved. The experience was unsettling, lingering in our minds like a bad dream. We had no explanation for what we'd heard, no logical reason for the strange sounds. The next day, we told our landlord, a kindly old man with a twinkle in his eye and a lifetime of stories about the building. His face turned solemn as we told him about the strange occurrences. "You know," he said, his voice quiet, "this building has a history." He told us about his mother, a woman who had lived in the building for decades. She had passed away several years ago, but her presence lingered, he said, a comforting presence for some, a haunting one for others. "She's a good soul," he said, his voice soft. "She watches over the building, protects the tenants. She just likes to make her presence known." He chuckled, a soft, hesitant sound that seemed to resonate with a deeper, unspoken truth. "It's nothing to worry about," he added, his voice firm despite the lingering fear in his eyes. "She's just looking out for you." His words offered little comfort. The events of the previous night were etched in our minds, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces that might lurk in the shadows. We couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, something wasn't quite right. As the days turned into weeks, the strange occurrences continued. We heard the creaking of footsteps on the staircase, the soft scrape of a hand on the railing, the faint whisper of a voice calling our names. The whispers always seemed to come from behind closed doors, from the darkness of the basement, from the hidden corners of the old building. We learned to live with the unsettling presence, to ignore the prickling sensation of being watched, to accept the reality of an unseen world that seemed to overlap with our own. We kept the back door locked at all times, a small comfort against the unseen forces that seemed to have claimed our building. One evening, I was sitting in the living room, reading a book, the dim light from the lamp casting long shadows on the worn furniture. I could hear Laura in the kitchen, a symphony of clattering pots and sizzling pans as she prepared dinner. The silence was broken by a slow, deliberate creaking sound. I glanced at the back door, its rusty lock a grim reminder of the unseen presence that haunted our building. The creaking grew louder, closer, as if someone were slowly climbing the stairs. I put down my book, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear Laura stop in the kitchen, the clatter of utensils replaced by the sound of her shallow breathing. We listened together, a shared fear uniting us in the face of the unseen. The creaking stopped. We held our breath, our senses on high alert. Then, a soft rapping sound echoed from the back door. We exchanged a frantic look. Our hands trembled as we reached for our makeshift weapons, the saucepan and the wooden spoon. We had no idea who or what was on the other side of the door, but we knew we had to face it. We slowly, cautiously, opened the door, our eyes scanning the shadowy staircase. But there was nothing there. Just the empty stairwell, the dim light from our apartment casting long, eerie shadows on the damp concrete walls. We stood there for a moment, our hearts pounding in our chests. Then, a faint, almost inaudible whisper drifted from the darkness. "Hello," it whispered. "Hello." We slammed the door shut, our bodies trembling with a mixture of fear and confusion. We leaned against the door, its old, rusty lock a fragile barrier against the unseen forces that seemed to have claimed our building. As the days turned into weeks, the strange occurrences continued. The creaking footsteps, the whispered voices, the feeling of being watched, a constant reminder that we were not alone. We didn't know if the landlord's mother was the source of the unsettling presence, or if it was something else entirely. But we knew that whatever it was real, and it was part of our lives now. We learned to live with it, to accept the reality of an unseen world that existed alongside our own. We kept the back door locked, a small comfort against the unseen forces that seemed to have claimed our building. And we tried to find a sense of normalcy in the midst of the strange and unsettling. We never understood the whispers, the footsteps, the presence. But we knew that our building had a history, a story that had unfolded over decades, a story that continued to echo in the creaking stairs, the whispering shadows, the unsettling. It was Friday night, the air thick with anticipation for the weekend. My mom worked the 3 to 11 shift, and by this time, she'd be making her way home from the supermarket, her arms laden with groceries. We had a routine. She'd call to let me know she was on her way, and I'd go wait by the front door, ready to help carry in the bags. It was a simple, ordinary thing, but it felt comforting. anchoring us in the predictable rhythm of our lives. The familiar ring of the house phone startled me out of my gaming trance. I winced, the jarring noise a stark contrast to the quiet hum of the console. It was my mom, her voice a mix of tired relief and eagerness. "I'm almost home, honey. Can you come help me with the groceries?" I nodded, feeling a familiar warmth spread through me. There was something comforting about knowing my mom was coming home, her presence a tangible anchor in the shifting sands of my teenage world. I switched off the console and headed for the front door, the echo of the phone call fading into the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. As I stood waiting by the front door, the kitchen light reflecting off the hallway mirror, I noticed something odd. In the reflection, behind me, stood a woman. I couldn't place her face, she wasn't anyone I knew. Her gaze was fixed on me, a steely intensity in her eyes that sent a chill down my spine. It felt like hours, but it couldn't have been more than 5 seconds before she turned and disappeared into the hallway leading to my bedroom. My heart hammered in my chest, a frantic tattoo against my ribs. I spun around, scanning the hallway, but it was empty. The woman was gone. My breath hitched, catching in my throat. A wave of unease washed over me, a sense of something amiss, something sinister lurking just beyond my perception. The sound of my mom's car pulling into the driveway broke through the haze of confusion that had settled over me. I hurried to the door, flinging it open before she even had a chance to park. "Mom!" I started, my voice barely a whisper. "Did you see a woman in the house?" She was standing in the hallway, looking at me. My mom's weary smile faltered as she took in my frantic expression. "A woman? In the house? Honey, you must be mistaken. It's just you and me here." "But I saw her, Mom," I insisted, my voice raising in a desperate plea for understanding. "She was right there, in the hallway, staring at me. She disappeared into my room." My mom sighed, the lines around her eyes deepening with worry. "It's probably just your grandmother, sweetie. She's been feeling a bit down lately, and she likes to wander around the house. Don't worry about it." "My grandmother?" I echoed, feeling a wave of nausea rise in my throat. My grandmother had passed away years ago, a fact that was etched into my memory like a permanent scar. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that this woman was not my grandmother. "Yes, your grandmother," my mom said, a reassuring tone in her voice. "She's been coming around more lately, trying to find ways to be close to us." I stared at my mother, my mind struggling to grasp the absurdity of her words. "Mom, my grandmother is dead." "I know that, she's dead." "Oh, honey," my mom said, her voice tinged with the familiar mixture of weariness and exasperation. "It's just your grief talking, you're imagining things. Come on, help me with the groceries before they get warm." I stood there, frozen in place, the weight of my fear pressing down on me like a physical force. I wanted to believe my mom, to accept her explanation, but the image of that woman, her steely gaze burning into me, was too vivid to ignore. A cold knot of fear twisted in my stomach, a primal instinct screaming at me to flee, to escape the suffocating weight of the unknown. I forced myself to move, my legs feeling leaden, my steps unsure. As I helped my mom carry the bags inside, the fear I felt only intensified. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the window, felt like a premonition of something terrible, something inevitable. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something unseen was lurking in the shadows, waiting for its moment to strike. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and denial. I tried to convince myself that I had simply imagined the woman, that my grief for my grandmother had manifested itself in a distorted vision. I spent hours playing video games, seeking refuge in the familiar comforts of the virtual world, desperate to escape the whispers of fear that haunted my waking hours. But the fear persisted, clinging to me like a shadow, growing darker and more suffocating with each passing day. I couldn't sleep, the image of the woman's face flashing before my eyes every time I closed them. I couldn't concentrate, every sound in the house triggering a surge of panic. One afternoon, I was home alone, my mom working her afternoon shift. I was cleaning my room, trying to distract myself from the growing sense of dread that gnawed at my edges. As I was putting away some clothes, I noticed something out of place. It was a small, faded photograph tucked behind a book on my bookshelf, a picture I had never seen before. The photo depicted a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes strangely empty. An unsettling familiarity clung to the image, a sense of recognition that I couldn't quite place. I picked up the photograph, my fingers trembling slightly. I stared at the woman's face, the uncanny resemblance to the woman I had seen in the hallway sending chills down my spine. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I lay awake, the image of the woman in the photo imprinted onto my mind. The fear was palpable, a living entity that suffocated the air around me. Unable to bear the silence any longer, I decided to call my mom. The line buzzed, ringing unanswered. My stomach lurched, a wave of panic washing over me. I called again, and again, the same unnerving silence greeting each attempt. A cold dread seeped into my bones, the fear finally reaching its crescendo. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. I grabbed the photograph, clutching it in my hand as I raced out of the house, the fear propelling me forward. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get away, to find help. The streets were deserted, the air thick with the oppressive silence of the night. I ran, my breath catching in my throat, my legs burning with fatigue, but the fear fueled my every step. I didn't know how long I had been running when I stumbled upon a small diner, its neon sign casting a sickly yellow glow onto the deserted street. The door creaked open as I entered, the warmth of the diner a stark contrast to the chill of the night air. I collapsed onto a stool at the counter, my body shaking uncontrollably. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, looked at me with concern. I tried to speak, but only a choked sob escaped my lips. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked, her voice soft and soothing. I shook my head, unable to form words. I thrust the photograph into her hand, the fear in my eyes speaking volumes. The waitress looked at the photograph, her expression changing from concern to alarm. She took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "Honey, you need to stay here. I'll call the police." I nodded, the tears finally spilling over, the dam of fear finally breaking. As the waitress dialed the phone, I tried to explain what had happened, my voice trembling, my words jumbled and incoherent. The woman in the photo, the woman I had seen in the hallway, the woman who had haunted my dreams, she wasn't just an apparition, a figment of my imagination. She was real. She was here, and she was looking for me. The blue and red lights of the police car pierced through the darkness, their arrival a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness of my fear. The police officers took my statement, their expressions grim, their eyes reflecting the weight of the unsettling truth. The investigation was long and arduous. The police questioned my mom repeatedly, but she insisted that I was mistaken, that she had never seen the woman in the photo, that my grandmother's death had triggered a deep-seated anxiety that manifested itself in hallucinations. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, the officers agreed to keep the case open, their suspicion growing with each passing day. They even managed to trace the photograph to a local antique shop, but the shopkeeper had no memory of selling the photo or even having it in his inventory. The mystery continued to deepen, the truth hidden behind a veil of shadows, a silent terror that whispered in the darkness. I knew, with a gnawing certainty, that the woman in the photo was real, that she was somehow connected to my family, and that she was not leaving me alone until she had achieved whatever purpose she had set for herself. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and the investigation grew cold, the trail going dead. The fear lingered though, a constant companion, a whispered threat that hung in the air, a chilling reminder that the world was not as safe as I had always believed. I moved out of my childhood home, the memories of that night forever etched onto my soul. The fear never left me, but it softened over time, morphing into an uneasy suspicion, a nagging doubt about the nature of reality, the porousness of the veil between what we see and what might be lurking just beyond our perception. I never forgot the woman in the photograph, the woman who had haunted my dreams, the woman who had shown me that the world could hold both beauty and darkness, the familiar and the unimaginable, all intertwined in a complex tapestry of life and death. And sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I would catch a glimpse of a shadow in the corner of my eye, a fleeting image of a woman, her eyes intense, her gaze fixed on me, a reminder that the line between reality and fantasy could be thin, fragile, and easily crossed. The woman in the photo became a symbol of the unknown, a reminder of the unfathomable mysteries that lay hidden beneath the surface of our everyday lives.